I watched my stepmother laugh as the movers threw my boxes onto the curb, clutching the deed she had forged my signature on. She thought she had won the war for my father's legacy, but she didn't know I was already studying the one thing that could destroy her: forensic accounting. The rain was falling that day, a cliché that felt like the universe was weeping alongside me. It was cold, the kind of damp chill that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. I stood on the sidewalk, shivering in a thin coat, watching the heavy oak doors of my childhood home slam shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Through the front window, I could see her silhouette. Lydia. She was holding a champagne flute, her posture rigid with triumph. She didn't just want me gone, she wanted me erased. My father, Thomas Bennett, had been a giant of a man. He built Bennett Logistics from a single truck into a regional empire. He was kind, generous, and utterly blind when it came to love. When my mother passed away when I was 10, he was devastated. For 5 years, it was just the two of us against the world. Then he met Lydia. She was a realtor who sold him a commercial property, and within 6 months, she had sold him a dream of a complete family. I was 15 then. Even at that age, I sensed something predatory about her smiles, something calculated in the way she touched his arm only when people were watching. But my dad was happy, and I wanted him to be happy. So I swallowed my doubts. I played the part of the dutiful daughter. 10 years later, my father died of a sudden, massive heart attack. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I was 25, fresh out of art school, floating through life with no real direction because I always assumed I had time. I assumed my father would be there to guide me. Lydia's grief lasted exactly until the funeral reception ended. The moment the last guest left, the black veil came off, and the shark emerged. She told me 2 days after the funeral that we needed to discuss the estate. She sat me down in my father's study, sliding a stack of papers across the mahogany desk. She told me it was standard procedure, just administrative transfers to keep the business accounts from freezing. She said the lawyers were swamped and we needed to expedite things to pay the staff. I was in a fog. I had been taking sedatives just to sleep. I trusted her because my father trusted her. I signed where she pointed. I didn't read the fine print. A week later, I found the locks changed. When I banged on the door, she opened it with a smirk I will never forget. She held up a document, a quitclaim deed, and a waiver of inheritance rights. It had my signature on it. But it wasn't the document I thought I had signed. She had pulled a bait and switch. Or maybe she had traced it. It didn't matter how she did it. The law saw my signature, and the law said I had voluntarily given up everything. My father's will had left everything to me, with a stipend for her, but this new document, dated after the will, superseded it. She claimed I had agreed to a cash settlement, a settlement she never paid, claiming I had already received it in assets that didn't exist. I tried to fight it. I went to the family lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, who had served my father for decades. He looked at the papers, looked at me with pity, and told me that without proof of coercion or forgery, the documents were ironclad. Lydia had covered her tracks. She had witnesses, her friends, who signed affidavits saying they saw me sign the papers willingly. I was homeless, I was an orphan, and I was broke. That night on the curb, watching my belongings get soaked by the rain, something inside me snapped. It wasn't a snap of madness, but a snap of clarity. Screaming wouldn't help. Crying wouldn't help. Lydia was playing a game of power and money. She thought she was untouchable because she understood the rules of greed, but she didn't understand the rules of accountability. I moved into a studio apartment that was smaller than my old walk-in closet. It smelled of mildew and stale cigarettes. I sold my jewelry, my designer clothes, everything of value just to pay the first 6 months of rent. I got a job waiting tables at a diner that stayed open 24 hours. My friends from my old life drifted away. They were uncomfortable with my tragedy, or perhaps Lydia had poisoned them against me too. It didn't matter. I didn't have time for social calls. I enrolled in the local state university. I didn't go back for art. I went for business administration with a concentration in accounting. The first year was hell. I worked the night shift at the diner, serving coffee to truckers and insomniacs, then went to class with eyes burning from exhaustion. I studied while standing on the bus. I listened to lectures on auditing while scrubbing grease off diner tables. I became obsessed. I didn't just want to learn how to balance a ledger. I wanted to learn how to tear one apart. I wanted to know where money hid. I wanted to know how people lied with numbers. Every time I felt like quitting, I would check social media. Lydia wasn't hard to find. She was living the life of a wealthy widow. Photos of her in Paris, buying a new Mercedes, renovating the house my mother had designed. She was burning through my father's legacy like it was infinite kindling. Seeing her face, that smug, untouchable smile, gave me a second wind. I would drink another black coffee and open my textbook on forensic auditing. It took me 4 years to get my degree and another year to pass the CPA exam. I graduated top of my class, not because I was the smartest, but because I was the hungriest. I landed a job at a mid-sized accounting firm that specialized in litigation support and fraud examination. I was 29. I had bags under my eyes and a wardrobe consisting entirely of thrift store blazers, but I had the tools I needed. I spent my days hunting embezzlers and hiding assets for divorce cases. I learned the tricks. I learned about shell companies, layering, offshore accounts, and ghost employees. I learned that criminals are almost always arrogant. They think no one is looking at the details. They think the volume of transactions will hide the one dirty wire transfer. But I looked. I always looked. In the evenings, I began my real work. I started building a dossier on Lydia. Because she was a public figure in the local socialite scene, a lot of her life was visible. She had started a charity foundation in my father's name, the Thomas Bennett Memorial Fund. It was disgusting. She used his memory to throw galas where she could wear $10,000 gowns. But charities are required to file public tax documents, Form 990. I pulled every tax return for the foundation. On the surface, it looked clean. Donations came in, grants went out, but the ratios were off. The administrative costs were astronomical. I dug deeper. I looked at the vendors the charity was paying, event planners, caterers, consulting firms. One name stood out, Aurora Consulting, based in Delaware. The charity had paid Aurora Consulting over $500,000 in 2 years for strategic planning. I used my firm's resources, strictly after hours of course, to trace Aurora Consulting. It was a shell. No website, no employees on LinkedIn, just a registered agent address in Wilmington. But Lydia wasn't a master criminal, she was just greedy, and greedy people get lazy. I found a connection between Aurora Consulting and a property management company in Miami. Who owned the property management company? A limited liability corporation registered in Nevis. It was a classic laundering scheme. She was siphoning money from my father's business into the charity, paying the fake consulting firm, and then moving the money offshore to buy personal assets. But I needed more than just a suspicion. I needed the smoking gun. I waited. Patience is the hardest part of forensic accounting. You have to let the target make the mistake. The mistake happened 3 years into my career. Lydia decided to sell Bennett Logistics. It was a huge deal, covered in the business journals. She was selling the company to a multinational conglomerate for $60 million. She was cashing out. If she sold the company, the records would disappear into the vault of the acquiring corporation, and I would never get the evidence I needed to prove the initial forgery and the subsequent embezzlement. I had to move. I took a week off work. I didn't sleep. I spent 20 hours a day combing through public records, cross-referencing her social media posts with flight logs and credit card transaction data I managed to infer from vendor breaches found on the dark web. Legally gray, I know, but I wasn't using it in court. I was using it to find where to look legally. I found it. When Lydia forged my signature on the quitclaim deed, she had to have it notarized. The notary was a woman named Sarah Jenkins. I tracked Sarah down. She wasn't a notary anymore. She was working at a bakery in a town 3 hours away. I drove there on a Tuesday morning. I ordered a coffee and a scone and waited until her break. When she came out back to smoke a cigarette, I approached her. "Sarah?" I asked. She looked tired. Life hadn't been kind to her either. "Yeah?" "My name is Caroline Bennett. You notarized a deed for my stepmother, Lydia, 6 years ago." Her face went pale. The cigarette trembled in her hand. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I know Lydia paid you, probably a few $1,000s, maybe 5, to stamp a document when I wasn't in the room." "I can't talk to you," she said, turning to the door. "Sarah, listen to me," I said, stepping in her path. "I'm a forensic accountant now. I'm building a case against Lydia for massive fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. The IRS is going to get involved. The FBI is going to get involved. When that ship goes down, everyone on it drowns." She stopped. "If you come forward now," I said, bluffing slightly about the immediate FBI involvement, "if you sign an affidavit stating that I was not present when you stamped that deed, you become a witness, not a co-conspirator. You can save yourself. But if I have to find the money trail that leads to you, and I will find it, you go to prison with her." Sarah looked at me, and then she looked at the ground. Tears welled up in her eyes. "She told me it was just a formality. She said you were sick and couldn't come in." "Will you testify?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes." That was the first nail in Lydia's coffin, but I didn't just want the house back. I wanted her world down. I wanted her to feel the helplessness I felt on that curb. I took Sarah's affidavit and my boxes of financial research to a law firm in the city, Sterling and Associates. Robert Sterling was the kind of lawyer who scared other lawyers. He was expensive, but he agreed to take the case on a contingency basis once he saw what I had. "This is a masterpiece," Sterling said, flipping through my flowcharts of Lydia's shell companies. "You've traced every cent." "I want to freeze her assets," I said, "before the sale of the company goes through." "We can do better than that," Sterling smiled. "We can file a RICO suit, Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Because she used the mail and wire services to commit fraud across state lines repeatedly, we can go for triple damages." We filed the lawsuit on a Friday afternoon. It's a strategic move. It ruins the weekend and gives the banks time to lock the accounts before the defendant can move money on Monday morning. I wasn't there when Lydia was served, but I heard about it. She was at a spa getting a mud wrap. A process server walked right into the treatment room and dropped the thick stack of papers on the table. Monday morning, the chaos began. The sale of Bennett Logistics was halted immediately. The acquiring company pulled out the moment they caught wind of the fraud allegations. Lydia's bank accounts were frozen by a court order. She called me. It was the first time I had heard her voice in 6 years. "Caroline," she hissed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "Hello, Lydia," I said. I was sitting in my office, a warm cup of coffee in my hand. "I'm balancing the books." "You ungrateful little brat. I took care of you. I'm going to sue you for slander. I have the best lawyers in the state." "You had the best lawyers," I corrected her. "But lawyers usually require retainers, and since your accounts are frozen and your credit cards are declined, I doubt they're going to do much work for you. By the way, how is Aurora Consulting doing? I hear business in Delaware is slow this time of year." There was a silence on the other end, a heavy, terrifying silence. She realized then that I knew. "We can settle this," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I can give you a share. We can split the company sale." "I don't want a share, Lydia. I want it all. It was never yours." I hung up. The legal battle lasted 8 months. Lydia tried everything. She tried to claim I was insane. She tried to claim the notary was lying. She tried to hide assets in cryptocurrency, but I found those wallets too. I had spent years studying the blockchain. Every time she tried to move, I was 3 steps ahead. I wasn't just reacting, I was hurting her. The discovery phase was brutal for her. I deposed her myself. Sitting across the conference table from her was surreal. She looked older. The stress had cracked the porcelain veneer. Her makeup was a little too heavy, her clothes a little less pristine. "Miss Bennett," I asked, using her married name, which she clung to like a shield, "can you explain this transfer of $50,000 to Luxe Interiors on dates when no renovations were being done at the company headquarters?" "It was a retainer for future work," she stammered. "And does Luxe Interiors usually operate out of a residential apartment in the Cayman Islands, rented in your maiden name?" I slid a photo of the apartment complex across the table. Her lawyer put a hand on her arm. "Don't answer that." But her face answered it. The fear was real now. She wasn't fighting for the money anymore. She was fighting to stay out of prison. In the end, she capitulated. The evidence of the forged deed, combined with the undeniable proof of embezzlement from the company and the charity, was overwhelming. The district attorney had taken an interest in the tax fraud aspect, and Lydia was looking at federal time. Her lawyers approached Sterling with a plea. She would surrender everything: the house, the company, the remaining cash, the jewelry, the cars, in exchange for us dropping the civil suit and advocating for leniency on the criminal charges. I accepted the surrender of assets. I made no promises about the prison time. The day I took the house back, the weather was beautiful. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. It was the complete opposite of the day I left. I stood on the curb, watching the movers. But this time, they weren't taking my things out. They were taking her things out. And it wasn't boxes of clothes. It was everything. The furniture she bought with stolen money? Seized. The art? Seized. Her designer wardrobe? Seized to be auctioned off to pay back the charity she had defrauded. Lydia walked out of the house carrying a single duffel bag. She was wearing jeans and a plain sweater. No jewelry, no makeup. She stopped when she saw me. She looked small. The monster that had haunted my nightmares was just a pathetic, greedy woman who got caught. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice raspy. "You ruined my life." "You ruined your own life, Lydia," I said. "I just did the math." She got into a taxi, she didn't have a car anymore, and drove away. I walked up the steps to the heavy oak doors. I used my key, the original key, which I had kept on a chain around my neck for 6 years. It still worked. The house was empty, echoing. It smelled of her perfume, a scent I would have to scrub out, but the bones of the house were still my father's. I walked into the study. The mahogany desk was still there. I sat down in his leather chair. It squeaked, a familiar sound that brought tears to my eyes. I opened the top drawer. Empty. I placed my CPA license on the desk. Rebuilding Bennett Logistics wasn't easy. Lydia had gutted the cash reserves and demoralized the staff. But when I walked onto the warehouse floor for the first time as the owner, the old-timers, the ones who had known my dad, looked at me with hope. They knew the story. They knew I had fought for this. I implemented new accounting controls immediately. Transparency became the company motto. As for Lydia, the leniency didn't help much. Tax evasion is a serious crime, and the IRS doesn't care about sob stories. She got 5 years in a minimum security facility. But the real punishment was the bankruptcy. When she gets out, she will have nothing. No credit score, no assets, no reputation. She will be starting over at 55 with a felony record. She might have to work at a diner. She might have to stand on a curb and watch her life fit into a single bag. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my father's study and go over the old ledgers. I trace the lines of his handwriting, the honest numbers of a man who built something real. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is a balance sheet. You have debts and you have credits. Lydia took a loan out on my life that she couldn't afford to pay back. She thought I was a liability, something to be written off and forgotten. She didn't realize I was an asset, an appreciating asset, and when the audit finally came, I made sure she paid every single penny. The satisfaction wasn't in the money. I donated the recovered funds from her fake charity to real causes, legitimate scholarships for kids who lost their parents. The satisfaction was in the logic of it. The universe is chaotic, unfair, and cruel. Bad things happen to good people. But in the world of accounting, everything has to balance. For every debit, there must be a credit. For 6 years, my life was in the red. Now, finally, I'm back in the black. I remember one specific moment during the deposition. Lydia had snapped at me, asking why I couldn't just move on. "Why are you so obsessed?" she had screamed. "It's just paper. It's just numbers." I leaned forward then, looking her dead in the eye. "Lydia," I said softly, "it's not just numbers. It's my father's life. It's his sweat, his time, his love. You tried to steal his past. I'm just protecting his future. I still live in the house. I repainted the walls. I got rid of the gaudy chandeliers she installed. I turned her glam room into a nursery for my daughter, who I named after my mother. Last week, I received a letter from prison. It was from Lydia. It was short, asking for money for the commissary. She said the food was terrible and she needed toiletries. I didn't burn the letter. I didn't get angry. I simply took out a red pen. I circled the request, and next to it I wrote, "Insufficient funds." Then I filed it away in a cabinet marked "Closed Cases," because that's what she is to me now, a closed case, a resolved discrepancy, a bad debt written off. I'm Caroline Bennett. I'm a forensic accountant, and my books are finally balanced.